as I mentioned earlier, Shannon did end up leaving the show after 3 seasons and was replaced by Rose McGowan. And one of the biggest reasons why it is rumored that she left is because of the fact that, hi friend, welcome back to the channel. Do you guys remember late 90s to early 2000s TV shows? We had such good, iconic TV shows back then. It was TV shows like The Wire, Sex and the City. We also had TV shows like Buffy. It was just like back to back to back to back iconic TV shows for maybe like 5 years. I feel like there is not a lot of iconic TV shows like that anymore. There isn't a lot of like original TV shows like that anymore. Maybe the TV shows that I can probably think of right now off the top of my head is Game of Thrones and maybe The Boys. Those two shows are very original, and very iconic, and they have a very iconic fan bases and things like that. But as far as like back then, we had TV shows that were like consistently like on air that were so good and so original, and I loved a lot of them. And one of those TV shows is Charmed. And with the recent passing of Shannen Doherty, it kind of made me think of Charmed. It kind of made me reflect on Charmed and how much I loved that show growing up and how much I couldn't get enough of those sisters. And I just wanted to kind of walk down memory lane of that show and how much it impacted my life. Charmed literally had it all. It had drama, it had action, it had witches, it had sisterhood, and most notable, the problematic men.
Oh, I'm nobody's hero.
Charmed used to air on what was known before as the WB network, and it was just a whole bunch of shows in one night. I want to say the Buffy was also on this channel, and I used to like get up. I used to come home every night after school to watch my favorite shows all the time, and most of my favorite shows were on the WB network. And I just remember like being in high school, and literally it was like an event, right? I don't know if a lot of people remember this. Gen Z probably doesn't know what I'm talking about, but back then you had to watch your shows like while it was airing, because we did not have streaming back then. You had to watch your shows while it was on air, or else you had to wait until the repeat, which would probably be in a couple of weeks or a couple of months, or you had to record it on a DVD. So if you missed the show, you missed the show, you missed the air date, you missed the air date. So you literally had no choice. So for us, we had to make an event and to really plan our schedules and calendars around watching these shows. When a show was airing at 7 p.m., you better have your popcorn, you better have your phone off, you better have all the stuff that you need to air that show, to watch that show on air live. Charmed was one of those shows for me where I had to make an event out of it. I had to like plan my day. I had to make sure I didn't have any sort of drama practice. I had to make sure I wasn't hanging out with my friends that night. One of the most memorable things about Charmed was this theme song. And actually there were so many iconic TV shows back then, and the thing that made the shows kind of stand out was the theme song, and Charmed had a really, really iconic theme song. That's a huge difference between TV shows now and TV shows back then. The theme songs were so significant. The producers would produce these long form intros to the theme songs where you got to see every character, you got to see side pictures of them. That's how you kind of knew who was who on the show. But nowadays, you have to either skip the intro, or you kind of have to guess who the actors are, or you have to like look it up. So this show had 3 sisters. It was Prue, Piper, Phoebe, and later Paige, and together they formed the Charmed Ones, who were 3 sisters who found out as they were living at home that they were the Charmed Ones, one of the most powerful witches in the world.
Count 3, set us free. Count 3, set us free.
And as I mentioned before, this show had everything that you wanted in a show. It had sisterhood, of course, and it had drama, and it had witches, it had magic, and I really want to say one of my favorite things in TV shows and TV realms is, of course, witches and wizards and things like that. I really love stuff that has to do with witches and wizards and magic because it's so fantastical and it's unrealistic and unexpected. I love all the magic and all the things like that when it comes to some TV shows. Now, let's talk about each sister's powers, okay? Because this was one of the most important things when it came to the show. The first sister is Prue Halliwell, who is played by Shannen Doherty. She's the more edgy, bad girl type of character, and she's really like usually very like, I'ma do what I want, I do what I want. And people can call her a little bit like controlling because she's the oldest, and she possesses the power of telekinesis. That means that she can move things with her mind.
Later in the seasons, Prue also hones her martial arts skills, becoming a strong hand-to-hand combatant. Throughout the 3 seasons, she is recognized as the strongest and most powerful witch amongst the Halliwell sisters.
And unfortunately, Prue's character did only last until about season 3. We'll get into more why later, but keep that in mind. Piper Halliwell, who is the middle sister, is played by Holly Marie Combs. And she was the one that was kind of the peacemaker of the group. She was the calm one, the one that wanted to come make sure everybody was chill. Everybody was doing what they're supposed to do. Everybody didn't like have a hot head, and she tried to calm everybody down. In season 1, Piper had the ability to freeze time. She can freeze anybody around her besides her and her sisters, of course, but she could freeze anybody around her. And later, she had the ability to not freeze things, but to blow things up, which was really, really cool.
Piper's powers are explained that she can slow down particles in motion so that objects, people, and even energy discharges, instantly freezing them in place. With the explosion, it means that she can speed up particles, eventually blowing them up. Throughout the series, Piper can freeze and unfreeze parts of people and is able to blow up bigger objects and demons.
Phoebe Halliwell, who was the youngest sister at the time, is played by Alyssa Milano. She's the more spunky sister. She's more like fun sister. She's the one that's kind of like blah, la, 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 la. You know, the world did it. She was very like happy-go-lucky, funny, kind of chill, really, really cool sister. Her abilities were to be able to see into the future and the past. A lot of the times in each episode, she actually didn't really get a lot of her premonitions correct. There was a few times where she thought she saw something, but it really wasn't in the context that she saw it in. And everything got kind of messed up.
Since Phoebe only had passive powers, she also develops martial arts skills to better help her sisters in battling evil. As the series goes on, she also gets active powers of levitation and empathy.
Paige Matthews, who is the youngest sister later in this show, is played by Rose McGowan. She's the baby sister, the one that kind of always, she's a little bit more sensitive, the one that always kind of wants to be taken care of, the one that always is kind of lost in a lot of the ways. And she joined this show later in season 4 after the unfortunate passing of Prue. And again, I'll talk about a little bit more of to why they had this huge character switch in the first place.
Paige was the secret love child of the Halliwell sisters' mother, Patty, and her Whitelighter, who is basically a guardian angel of witches. But that made Paige both a witch and a Whitelighter. Given up at birth, she was raised by adoptive parents. As the series progresses, Paige eventually gets sensing, glamoring, and healing powers.
Her abilities were she could astral project and orb into things. Because they wanted to separate Prue's powers from Paige's powers, they wanted to give her the power to telekinesis absorb things. So she could like absorb or make objects disappear and reappear. Like she could just take them to their, she like can call objects over and they appear, or she can call them over and she can disappear. Favorite sister is also not my favorite power. So my favorite sister had to be Phoebe because I felt like I related to her more and I resonated with her more. She also had the cutest outfits on, which I will definitely talk about later. But I really liked her because of the fact that I felt like her personality was more like my personality. And I thought Alyssa Milano was so pretty and she really was that girl. And I really, really liked her. My favorite power though has to be Piper's power and the ability to freeze time front and blow things up. She can freeze anything around her. She can freeze anything and like rearrange things around her and make it like, you know, like manipulate reality. And I thought that was just really cool. And her ability to blow things up was just out of this world. And I wish I could do that. So let's talk about the cultural impact of the show, because it just wasn't just a show about magic and creatures and romantic relationships and things like that. It still was very impactful, and people really loved it for several reasons. One of the biggest reasons why people really loved this show so much and it has so much impact was the strong female leads it had. At the time when shows were on air, there wasn't a lot of strong female leads. We didn't have like an Olivia Pope, we didn't have an Elisa Keating, we didn't have the women of Bridgerton leading TV shows like this. These sisters portrayed sisterhood in that way and gave us lots of, you know, things to think about when it comes to feminism at that time. These women were able to have all these powers, and they were like discovering themselves at the same time as they were discovering their powers. And the thing about them is the fact that they had to manage their powers and hide it from everybody around them besides themselves, right? They had to hide their powers because the show wasn't taking place in a fantasy world. It was taking place in the modern world. So what they had to do was hide their powers and be regular people every day. So they kind of had to struggle with that. If you can think of a show like Sabrina the Teenage Witch at the time, she was a teenage witch, which another one of my favorite TV shows. She was a teenage witch, and she also had to hide her powers from her boyfriend, from her friends, from, you know, everybody else around her. The same thing as these sisters. You know, there was a point where Piper became a mother. She was a mother, but then she had to like also be a mother and be, you know, and work and be a wife, and she had to try to save the world at the same time. Sabrina the Teenage Witch was a really good example of witchcraft in the modern world and modern TV at the time. And also Charmed was a good example of modern TV shows that talked about witchcraft. And I felt like both of those shows brought witchcraft to the mainstream and made witchcraft kind of cool and not so like witchery and evil. Like witches were actually doing good things and actually trying to protect and save the world, because I feel like at the time a lot of shows were coming out with witchcraft and it had to do with them being bad witches or like just evil witches. And I feel like for the first time in our reality, we were seeing witches that were actually good witches, and they were actually trying to protect people, and they were actually trying to do things right. And of course, iconic fashion. Early 2000s fashions was really cool, and I can talk more about early 2000s fashions, and I've done a video if you guys wanted to see that. But I feel like this show really brought out early 2000s and late 90s fashion to the mainstream, and it's so iconic, the things that these women were wearing. We had Prue, who was wearing more like darker clothes, more edgier clothes, more black clothes and things like that, because I said she was the more edgier, cool, fun one. We had Piper, who was the more practical one. She wore very practical clothes, very conservative, very much like, I think it's just because she was probably gonna be the wife of the show. I think that's why they probably made her a little bit more conservative and like more closed off. Of course, we had Phoebe, who was very daring with her clothes. I think again at the time she was the youngest one, so she was very daring. She always had something weird on, but fun. She was daring but like stylish and cool at the same time. But it was really interesting to see how she was dressed back then. And of course we had Paige. Because Paige was the youngest one, they made her look really young. She had really cutesy young looking clothes, which was really weird, but it was like a lot of laciness, a lot of thin materials. Somebody on Reddit actually pointed out the fact that it was so creepy that they were wearing less and less clothes as the seasons went on, which is quite interesting, because I just feel like it was definitely for the male gaze at that point and for the views, and I could not help but laugh at that comment. Another way that this show I think was very impactful was the fact that it had a lot of blending genres, right? We had, again, like I said before, it brought blending genres to the mainstream. It had drama, it had magic, it had all the stuff like that that you could really want in a show at the same time. I feel like the fusion of all these elements really made it very possible for the show to kind of reach a bigger audience, because you tune into the show and you see something that appeals to you, even though the show is specifically about witches, but there's always something in it for everybody. And I think that made it really interesting. I want to relate this video to how Charmed relates to now, right? What are we thinking about Charmed now? How has it impacted society now in 2024 as opposed to 1998 and things like that? And, you know, we see it, in a way, we do see how Charmed has kind of opened the gateway to, like I said before, lots more supernatural stuff. A show like Supernatural is a really great example. Supernatural became a very huge, successful show on also the WB, most likely because of Charmed, because they saw how good Charmed was, and people decided to make Supernatural a thing. And also there's also like the success of reboots. Reboots have kind of been happening a lot for the past few years. I haven't heard of a reboot in a while. I'm actually ready for Hollywood to go back to making original content. I'm sick of reboots. Yeah, so one of those reboots was Charmed that came out in 2018. Now, I will be honest with y'all, I did not watch the reboot because I wasn't feeling like that. Again, I'm not a big fan of rebooted TV shows. I don't think anything should be rebooted unless it's like 50 years old or something like that. I think I always want to stick to the originals. So I was very, very loyal to the original show, so I didn't even bother watching the reboot. But the reboot did last for 4 seasons, and it was generally about the sisters too. And it had 3 sisters. They're all very powerful, and it did quite well. But I heard that the original cast members of the Charmed TV shows were actually not happy because they didn't really have anything to do with the reboot. So they weren't happy that they were not a part of it.
But it sucks. I haven't seen it. I can't say that. I've never seen it.
I didn't hear what you said.
I said it sucks. But I'm happy that people have jobs.
Let's say that you're looking for shows like Charmed that takes place in the more recent times. I would look to shows like The Witches of East End. It has to do with witches, which is great. Once Upon a Time, if you're looking for more like magical shows like that. There's also a show called The Magicians. I haven't checked that out. There's also The Originals, which is really good, which is based off of the Vampire Diaries. I can also make a video about Vampire Diaries because that's another show that I really liked, and things like that. So those are all really good shows I would recommend if you want a show like Charmed. Now I want to talk about, where are they now? What happened to these 4 amazing women ever since the show ended? And where are they now? What are they doing? Let's just try to kind of catch up to them in 2024. As I mentioned before, Shannen Doherty did pass away in June of 2024, and she unfortunately passed because she has been dealing with breast cancer for about 10 years, and she succumbed to the cancer. A lot of the people in the 90s in those iconic TV shows were really, really, really sad and upset about her death, which makes a lot of sense because that show and Shannen Doherty in general really did impact a lot of us. It's always sad when something like this happens to such an iconic person like Shannen. Between the show ending and her death, she did go on to do a lot of small roles in TV shows. As I mentioned earlier, Shannen did end up leaving the show after 3 seasons and was replaced by Rose McGowan. And one of the biggest reasons why it is rumored that she left is because of the fact that Alyssa Milano, who played Phoebe, and her did not get along.
And why would you hire her again, just fire her? And he said, we didn't mean to. And he said, but we've been backed into this corner. He said, we're basically in a position where it's one or the other. We were told that it's her or me, and Alyssa has threatened to sue us. for a hostile workplace environment.
Supposedly, she ended up getting fired because of Alyssa Milano, and there was a lot of drama on set. They didn't really get along, and it was just really bad vibes on set. Even though these women were playing sisters on TV, they still were not getting along behind the scenes, and unfortunately, Shannen Doherty did have to leave.
Alyssa Milano, recently she was doing an interview with Andy Cohen, and she said something that surprised me, because she said that being on set was kind of like high school. Is there any truth to that? Do you understand her perspective?
I mean, are there times that were rough? Yeah, I mean, I think that, you know, when you work that closely together, there's always going to be times that are rough. Whether somebody wants to say that that's high school, their definition of high school, or maybe what high school was like for them, versus somebody else just saying like, you know, sometimes you don't always get along with the person 24/7 that you work with.
The three women, Rose and Holly and Shannen, were all like friends in real life, and I think Alyssa was not, because they never really got along with her. The three women would go on podcasts and interviews and talk a lot of shit about Alyssa and how much they didn't like her, how much she was a troublemaker.
I know her, and my judgment would be, I'm gonna get a lot of shit for saying this, but somewhere on the sociopath scale, for sure.
Before Charmed, Shannen was on a show called Beverly Hills 90210, which was also in another iconic TV show back in the 90s. And she also had a podcast called Let's Be Clear until her death. Rose McGowan is next. A little fun fact here, Rose McGowan and I share a birthday, September 5th, girlies, and her name is Rose and my middle name is Rose. So we're basically twins. Since the show ended, Rose did go on to become a very activist person in the Me Too movement and the feminist movement in general. She wrote a book called Brave, where she talks about in detail about her assault by Harvey Weinstein. So her experience and her telling her story really did shape the Me Too movement, which is incredible. Rose did go on to have successful movies like The Black Dahlia and Grindhouse, but she hasn't unfortunately had a project since 2022. The last thing we heard about her is that she was living in Mexico as of 2024. Holly Marie Combs, where is she right now? Holly Marie Combs went on to do a tiny little TV show called Pretty Little Liars, where she played the mother of Aria Montgomery, who was one of the biggest cast members on that show. She was in 62 episodes of that show, and that is another iconic TV show that we did have. Holly also went on to do a podcast called House of Hallowell, and her and Shannen were actually best friends. Actually, her, Shannen, and Rose were actually best friends up until her death, and they're always together. They guest starred on each other's podcasts, and they talked all the time and things like that. Last but not least, we're going to talk about Alyssa Milano. Alyssa Milano is actually considered one of the more popular ones of the group. She also had a really iconic TV era of her time. She was on Who's the Boss, a very long-running sitcom. She did her own little TV shows where she starred in Mistresses and Insatiable. Unfortunately, those two last shows didn't do very well, but you know, at least she stayed working. One of the reasons why Alyssa is so popular is because she is the more controversial one of the group. All eyes are on her because she's always doing something weird, and I like Alyssa Milano a lot, but she is a little bit considered problematic. One of those controversies was the fact that she asked her audience to donate to her son's baseball team, and the thing that makes the story kind of weird is the fact that a few days later she was seen at the Super Bowl in seats that cost a lot of money, like thousands upon thousands of dollars. The reason why people were so upset about that is like they were wondering why she would want to ask for money to fundraise for her son's baseball team when she could afford to go to a Super Bowl event that cost thousands of dollars. So people are very confused about that. And also apparently she bullied Britney Spears, which is really odd because Britney Spears is a victim. So it's like, why would you bully her? But she did apologize for that later. So I guess we can forgive her for that. The big controversy, of course, was the drama between her and Shannen Doherty.
You know, I can take responsibility for a lot of our our tension that we had.
That a show that has meant so much to so many people has been tarnished by a toxicity that is still, to this day, almost a quarter of a century later, still happening.
She's just one of those women that just gets on everybody's nerves no matter what she does, because she's so controversial. But I will say one thing about Alyssa is that she's very political. She has a lot of political opinions. She's very vocal about her policies and her politics online. She has a podcast called Sorry Not Sorry, where she kind of vocalizes all of these political ideas, and people seem to like that. Charmed was one of my favorite TV shows growing up, and I really loved it. And I felt like I had to do this video because, like I said before, Shannen's death really made me think about Charmed and how much I loved it and how much she meant to people. And whenever I hear a death of somebody that meant a lot to me as a child or growing up, or as a teenager growing up, it always kind of breaks my heart a little bit when they die, because I'm like, these people were a part of my life growing up. It's the same thing when Matthew Perry from Friends passed away. I was like, I grew up with these characters, and to know that one of them has passed on in real life is really sad. And I'm really, really thankful for Shannen, and I'm really glad that, you know, we got to have her as long as we did. Same thing with Matthew Perry. Please let me know what show you want me to cover next when it comes to TV shows in the 90s. There are so many good TV shows. I could list 1,000 of them right now. So yeah, I really appreciated you watching this video till the end. Comment below what your favorite TV shows was, and we can talk about it in the chat. I'll see you guys later for another video like this.